welcome. I'm Daniel G. Garza, and this is another episode of Putting Together Conversations. Welcome to the show. I want to welcome everybody who's watching us on all the 4 channels of Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Remember that you can be part of the conversation. There is a join the conversation, ask a question, be part of the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, will you do me a favor and scroll down, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and they'll let you know every time there's a new show on the air. And that's Christian and Daniel's show, the Card Devo, Put It Together Conversations, and breakfast readings on TikTok that I do every day. So make sure you're doing that. And if you're not following me on TikTok, I don't know, you're missing out. We have a show almost every day of the week. You can go check this out. A lot of spiritual coaching, meditations, and a lot of information. So go check that out. Remember, Put It Together Conversations is a show about you, where you come from, where you are now, and what your journey is like. And the idea is to motivate and inspire other people to go after their dreams and their goals. My guest today, let me bring up her name because I moved my things around. There we go. Denise Redeker, and let me tell you a little bit about her. Denise Redeker is a heart transplant recipient, patient advocate, organ donation advocate, and founder of Heartfelt Help Foundation. Founded in 2020, Heartfelt Help Foundation helps Bay Area transplant recipients both afford and source the medically required post-transplant housing that for most transplant recipients necessitates relocating temporarily to within a short distance of their hospital. Such expenses are rarely covered by insurers, often extremely expensive and sufficiently critical to transplant recovery that an inability to afford them can delay a patient's life-saving transplant surgery. She has been featured on numerous podcasts to discuss organ donations, heart disease, and the need for accessible housing in the San Francisco Bay Area. In her free time, Denise loves long walks on the beach and discovering new hiking trails with her husband Jim and her son Matthew. And without further, let me bring her to the stage. Hi, Denise.
Hey, Daniel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. Heartfelt Help Foundation. That's almost a tongue twister.
It's a mouthful is what it is.
And when you're not like very good at the speaking part, like me, but for those of you who are familiar with the show and want to know how I met my guest, Denise and I are both ambassadors for Lifeboat, and Denise, you were part of the transplant delegation or division of
Transplant Life, yeah.
And how long have you been an ambassador with Lifeboat?
At least a year, maybe a little bit longer.
And how did you come to get involved with them?
You know, that's a good question and one I'm not sure I have an answer to. I don't remember how I found them. I think I stumbled across them when I was looking for resources prior to actually starting the foundation and looking for people who had traveled a similar path as me. I dislike the word journey a lot, so we call it an adventure.
Nice.
And had the same adventure as I have, and found Transplant Life and got connected with them, and then became an ambassador.
Nice. And for those of you that have known me for a while and follow the show, know that I am part of the recovery delegation of Lifebulbs. And so we talk a lot about alcohol and drug recovery, but I also talk about cancer when I'm with them. So, and I thank my friend Anne-Marie, who is the one that got me connected and all this. So, but to the folks at Lifebulb, thank you for all the work you do, and thank you for having us as part of the ambassador program.
Absolutely. Love you, Anne-Marie.
And she is a fireball. She's a fireball.
Absolutely.
If anybody wants to know who we're talking about, she has been here on the show, so make sure you look her up on the YouTube page. Her interview is there, and you'll get a hint why. But so good to see you. You're in the San Francisco area.
I am north of San Francisco in Sonoma County wine country.
Nice. And how are things up there right now?
A little smoky, but we're lucky this year. Last year we were not so lucky. We're lucky enough that we don't have any local to us fires. None in the county right now. It's smoke's all coming from the ones that you read about in the newspaper all day long, or here on the news.
For anybody who's not watching, who's not in the California area, you might know this, but we are prone to fires, wildfires here in California. Fires and earthquakes. That seems to be our go-to thing.
Yeah, we actually call August, as now it's August through October these days, fire season. So we're in fire season now, which is like summer, late summer, early fall. It's not those seasons here. It's just fire season.
It's so interesting because I moved here from Texas, and Texas, I left hurricane and tornadoes behind, and people sometimes ask me, it's like, well, which do you fear the most? I'm like, well, they each have their own thing, but like you kind of just get used to it. Like June gloom, like I never knew about June gloom until I moved to California, and I was like, what is that? And then for those of you, again, if you've never been to California in the summer, actually summer nights are actually kind of cool. So it's little known fact. So anyway, that's a little bit of California weather for you folks. The news section of Putting Together Conversations, and now the weather. But so good to have you. And I after your bio and knowing a little bit about you, I'm so excited to hear your story. So Denise Redeker, tell us how you put it together.
Well, I'll start a while ago, just because I think it's pertinent to the story. Is I was diagnosed with postpartum cardiomyopathy, which is just a lot of words saying that it's an infection of your heart that was discovered after you have a baby, right after I delivered my son Matthew, and so I've lived with heart disease and then heart failure for 20, heavens, he's 29, so that many years. I have had an implanted pacemaker defibrillator and ICD implanted. I had actually 3 of them implanted before my transplant. And my doctors bandied around. They kept mentioning, this disease ends in transplant. But I think with all of us, who have that kind of a diagnosis looming over our heads, we push it to the side, or at least I did push it to the side and think, yeah, that happens to somebody else. That's not going to happen to me. So I completely ignored it until December of 2017, when my doctor sat me down, my cardiologist sat me down and said, without a transplant, you have probably a year left.
Wow.
And then it was like a freight train. And I really was forced to deal with the fact that without a transplant, that I wouldn't be here. Well, I wouldn't be here today for sure. And for good or bad, I think for me, it was for good. I didn't have much time to process that information because less than 2 weeks after that, I had a ventricular tachycardia event, which is just a big word for a lot of fast heartbeats that are uncontrolled and would not even be controlled by my defibrillator. So a defibrillator, when it's implanted in you, it does what a defibrillator does. It's an exterior device, and it shocks your heart back into a normal rhythm when it goes out of rhythm. So I kept getting shocked and my heart rate just wouldn't be controlled. So we went to the emergency room and I got admitted to the hospital and told that I would not go home until I had received my transplant because I was just too sick. So I moved into the hospital in January of 2018, not knowing if my wait would be a week or 2 months or a year. At that point, all I knew was that I was not leaving the hospital without a new heart.
Wow. Okay, so several things to like. That's okay. Thank you for really starting. Like I'm like, wow, like just from the beginning. Okay, let me go from the, because you're talking about being diagnosed. So your son was about 9 years old when you were first. the first diagnosis. Is that correct?
I was diagnosed on the day he was born.
Okay.
And actually, I was diagnosed by my father-in-law, who just passed away in January of this year. But he was a liver specialist, a doctor, MD, that was a liver specialist. And he walked into my hospital room, and I was still hooked up to an EKG at that point. And he looked at my EKG, and he was the only one who noticed that something was off.
Wow. So was then there an official diagnosis at that point?
It was. And what we've learned about that diagnosis is postpartum just means after you have a baby. That's all it means. And I have that diagnosis, and if you look at my medical records, that's still the diagnosis that's there. But really, I only got that label because of the fact that they diagnosed me right after I had a baby. I have a huge history of heart disease and heart failure on my dad's side of the family. Literally everybody except for one cousin has
Some sort.
Died of a heart attack or a sudden cardiac arrest, which are two different things. And they have all died very young. My dad died very young. His sister died very young. Her daughter died very young of heart disease. And so I am fairly convinced, and now that I donated my native heart to research and they've taken a look at it, they're fairly convinced that I actually had a congenital. I was born with a heart problem that just went undiagnosed until I was 29.
That was 29. That's where I got the 9 from. I was like, 39.
Yeah.
So let me ask this: as a new mom, like you're in the hospital, you're a new mom, you have this little baby. Obviously, if you're a new mom, okay, Garza, that's totally not a female, right? Like, yeah. They walked in with this little kid, and they're like, "Hey, here's your new kid.
Here's your kid." Oh, man, do I wish it worked that way.
This is where you go to school. But okay, so you're a new mom, and all the emotions and feelings that come with being a new mom. But then this kind of diagnosis is being thrown on you. Like, does it process?
Not at all. And I can't say that I am common. I think I had other things to do. I had a kid to raise and a life to go back to and a job to go back to. I had zero desire to process that. I felt fine. In my mind, I was asymptomatic. Really, in my mind, I thought the doctors were wrong. I thought everybody was wrong because I felt fine. And I went back to my life and really pretty much ignored the diagnosis. I'm a rule follower by nature. So they told me to follow up with a cardiologist every 6 months or every year, I think at that point. And I did. But I did that like I dutifully go for an annual physical and just was like, yeah, here we go. This is what I do to check this off my list, but you people don't know what you're talking about. And I really ignored it until, probably 15 or so years ago when I had my first ICD implanted, and learned that, and the doctor told me, you need surgery like yesterday.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? And because I feel fine. And he was like, your heart is not fine. Your heart is not fine at all. And so, and even then I was in denial. I remember him saying that he wanted to schedule to admit me later that day. And at that point, my son was in junior high, I think. And I said, no, we were about ready to have spring break at school. And I was like, no, I'm not wasting spring break in the hospital. We've got plans. We're doing things. So I'll see you after spring break.
Wow.
And the doctors were just, I remember them kind of going, but I don't know that that's a great idea. And I was like, I don't care. This is what we're going to do. And it turned out fine. Obviously, it turned out fine. I checked into the hospital when he went back to school and had my surgery, and it was fine. But I think that was the beginning of me advocating for myself and saying, we're going to figure out a way to make this work. This diagnosis, if I have to deal with this diagnosis, we're going to make it work with my life. That my life comes first, and then we will incorporate all the medical stuff into it. But and so that was kind of the beginning of my advocacy, is to just stand up for myself and say, this is how we're going to do this. If we're going to have to do this, this is how we're going to do this.
Before I ask my next question, I want to remind everybody you're watching Put It Together Conversations. I'm your host, Daniel G. Garza. My guest today is Denise Redeker, and we're talking about heart problems, noticing and starting your advocacy journey. And I find that really interesting. I wrote down normal because when I was diagnosed with AIDS back in 2000, I took it very light. The doctor was like, look, here's your diagnosis. I'm like, cool, where's the medication? He's like, yes, there's medication, but this is your life now. I'm like, that's cool. Like, can I walk out of here? Because I was very sick. And he's like, can I walk out of here? He's like, yes, but you realize you're diagnosed. I'm like, yeah. Give me the meds. Can I walk out of here? Like, am I going to be good? I had lost some hair. And I'm like, will my hair grow back?
You sound like me.
He's like, yes, but do you understand this? I'm like, yeah. When's my next appointment? Like, I got things to do. Like, I got a life to live. And when people have interviewed me, I tell them, I think that my lack of giving it that much attention helped me not fall into victimhood. I was like, I will not be at the mercy of everything. I am going to trek my own way. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was God's grace to me personally was that I didn't give it the throne in my life, for lack of a better term. My heart disease was my heart disease, but that wasn't the most important thing I had going on in my life. And I wasn't going to put it there. And I see, as in my now, as I mentor other people through this whole process, I see other people, the people who I work with, I watch other people give their disease priority in their lives. And my advice to them is always to find something else to put there. Take this out and give it the attention that it deserves, but don't make it the priority in your life. Don't make it the number one thing in your life. You've got other things to do and other people in your life that matter. And you make those people matter most. And your heart disease or your cancer or whatever you have going on, it's still going to be there. and you can deal with that, but give it the priority it deserves.
Pardon me. Christian is texting me now. I'm like, where are you? We have a show. Because I hear way too many times, and I want to hear more about heart, but we hear so many times people who are diagnosed, again, like you said, with whatever, it's like, I want to do this, but I have this. I want to do that, but I have this. And you see all this potential, and they don't move on. Was there a voice in your head? Was there a message that came to you that said, I will not do that? Because it usually comes from somewhere, but do you know where that fire comes from? Or was it something that you had from where you were younger?
Well, I'm a person, I have a strong faith-based background. So it was never like a aha moment where I was like, I'm going to make a conscious decision to do this. In fact, at first I just called it denial, that it was just, I am the queen of denial, and I can sail down that river quite nicely and just put things to the side until I have to deal with them and live my life. But I think it's more than that. I think denial can be for lack of a better thing, I think denial can be a healthy thing, because it is the conscious choice to make whatever you're dealing with not the priority in your life, to give it the space that it deserves. I never didn't pay attention to it, but I always gave it the space that it deserved. And I think that was, like I said, I think that was God's grace to me to put me in a headspace where I was capable of doing that, and not going overboard, not overreacting to it, not letting it control my life, but rather having me control it.
I'm so glad you brought up faith. I was raised Catholic, and there was always like, God knows why he does something. And it was very important for me for a long time to make sure to keep my faith in things. Even during my drug and alcohol years, there was still a little bit of faith that there was a purpose for everything that was happening in my life. But I'm so glad that you brought up faith, because I often tell people, it's like, if you're already of God in whatever religion you're in, you don't, it's not a punishment. It's not a, like, you did something wrong, so I'm going to make you pay for it now. It's just part of life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I would not be where I am today. I mean, obviously I wouldn't be here today without a transplant, but I wouldn't be here today without having gone through what I've gone through. I wouldn't choose that. And obviously none of us choose the trauma that we deal with, but everything is a season, and my season of trauma, I'm sure, isn't over with yet, because it never is. But I wouldn't be who I am today without it. And it has built me. And trauma builds you. It really does. It changes who you are, and I think makes you a better human.
I want to talk about fear for just a little bit, because it is part of our reality. And I think that most of us who have some kind of diagnosis, especially when they're like, you need this now kind of thing, when the doctor's like, I feel, and I think that fear has a place in advocacy, and fear has a place in our own personal recovery and growth. Was there a place for that in you, especially being a mom, I would think? What part did fear have in your life and in your advocacy work?
Well, I think anytime you get, I don't think that I came face to face with fear until I got that final diagnosis in December of 2017, that I was going to die in a year without a transplant. And transplants are not guaranteed. They're just not. There's not enough organ donors. There's not enough matches. Only a small percentage of people who pass away as organ donors actually are able to be organ donors, because it depends on where and how you pass. So there's all these limitations, and all that goes through your head. And I think that's when you come face to face with fear, is when you come face to face with like what feels like a death sentence to you. Or at least that's when I knew I was dealing with it. I might have been dealing with it in different ways beforehand, but I knew I was coming face to face with fear then. And what I made a conscious effort to do was to deal with it in chunks. I can do anything for 60 seconds. We can do anything for 60 seconds. And then I can do anything for 5 minutes. And I'm allowed to feel sorry for myself in this time for 5 minutes, and I'm going to set a timer. And then after that timer's off, the timer goes off, we got to deal. We have stuff to do. We've got to move on. We've got to put our logic brain back on and take off our emotional brain. And we've got stuff to do. And that's really what got me through that whole first year. Immediately pre and post transplant, was saying, okay, you can have your pity party, and you can be fearful, but we're setting a timer on this. Sometimes literally, like pulling out my phone and setting a timer. And once the timer goes off, we're done.
Yeah. I've done that recently with what I call him Worry Daniel. Worry Daniel is the one that runs around in circles and the sky is falling.
Mm-hmm.
And when things get a little critical, I'm like, okay, go. Like, go panic, worry. Because usually in the panic, for those of you that don't give yourself permission to panic and worry, usually in that panic and worry is where you find the solutions to what you need
Mm-hmm.
to do. That happens for me. Can I ask you about at what point and how a conversation with your kid went when you explained what was going on?
Sure. Like, well, he's lived with a mom who has heart disease his whole life. And that, for the most part, I actually wish he was here. I'd like to hear what he has to say about this. But I think for the most part, it didn't really change too much of his young adult life. But he had a mom that was in the hospital. As he got into junior high and high school, he had a mom who was in the hospital more than his friends' moms, that's for sure. And luckily, I think that it came at a time when, the worst of it came at a time when he was verging on adulthood, if not fully into adulthood. My transplant came after he'd graduated from college at that point. So I think it's actually formed him into a really empathetic, compassionate, truly decent human being. But he has a whole lot of empathy and a whole lot of compassion for humanity that I think comes from having a sick mom.
Gotcha. There is a question on the board for you.
Okay.
It says, Denise, do you believe that organ printing technology is going to be a realistic solution for organ transplants? Or do you feel there will be yet another service only available to the wealthy? Ooh.
That is a fantastic question. I think that organ printing technology is super interesting and very exciting. And I actually think it will be available to all organ transplant recipients at some point. But I think that point is, I hope I'm wrong about how long it's out, but I think it's at least 15 years out from being like a realistic solution. Do I think that the wealthy will probably have access to it quicker than that? Maybe. But it's going to have to go through years of testing to see if it's really a viable solution. I know that they've started to test in like rabbits. And for, I think, kidneys, but I'm not really sure of that. But it's very, very interesting, and I'm super excited about the prospects of what that holds for transplantation.
It kind of makes sense that it would be a rabbit, considering that Bugs Bunny coined the phrase "What's up, Doc?" So there is a connection there. That's a dad joke for you folks out there. That's a dad joke out there. Can you walk us through? Well, before I ask the question, everybody watching, this is Putting Together Conversations. I'm your host, Daniel G. Garza. My guest today is Denise Redeker. We're talking about transplants, children of people who live with conditions, and organ printing. So, but my question is, could you walk us through the day that you got the call and how that works for you? How that worked for you?
Well, when I was an inpatient in the hospital, and it was about 3 weeks after I had been admitted, a surgeon walked into my hospital room on January 29th of 2018 and said, "We have an offer for you." And I remember tilting my head to one side because it was late at night. And I don't know how much time you've spent in a hospital, but you don't sleep in a hospital. So I was, I don't know what I was doing, but I tilted my head to one side and just kind of said, I have zero idea what you're talking about. What does that even mean? And he said, I think we have the perfect heart for you. And I said, I will need more information about that. And my husband had just left. This is pre-COVID, so I had a visitor. We were able to have visitors. And so I got him on the phone and put him on speaker and had the surgeon go through all of the information about that they had and that they could share with me. The heart was a high risk heart. And he said, you have the option. We phrase it as an offer because you have the option to refuse it if you would like to. And I asked, the common question, why is it a high risk heart? And a heart can be, any organ can be high risk for a number of factors, some of which would be if it's Hep A or Hep C positive, if the donor was a IV drug user, and in my case, if the donor was imprisoned for a period of time. A very short period of time is the minimum requirement for the CDC. And that's only because the time you spent in prison, you're more likely to come into contact with a dirty needle or something that might have exposed you to a blood-borne disease like Hep A or Hep C. And that happened to be the situation in my case, is my donor had at some point recently been in prison. That didn't seem like a good enough reason to say no, so we said yes, and then the roller coaster began, and about 8 o'clock on January 30th, I was rolled into the surgical suite, and 8:30 a.m. the next day, I was rolled out.
Wow.
And I had actually 2 open heart surgeries that night because they put the new heart in, and while the surgeon was out talking to my family and friends that had been gathered in the waiting room to say that her new heart started up like that, the other surgeons that were in the room noticed that after they had closed me up that I was bleeding out internally, and so they had to re-crack open my chest that night and fix the internal bleeding. And then a week later, they found more internal bleeding, and I had to go back in. So I had 3 open heart surgeries in the span of a week.
Wow. A little needy there, Denise. Little tension. Just saying, 3.
3. That's well, I almost had a 4th, but which I think I might have cried and begged my way out of the 4th. And we found a solution that wasn't open heart surgery again. But it was the first year. Any doctor, anybody going through transplant will know that the first year is super complicated, and is usually the hardest. It's when they have suppressed your immune system the most. It's when you're most likely to go into organ rejection. I had both types of organ rejection, cellular and antibody level rejection, which has 2 different treatments. Went through all of that, and finally, after being transplanted at the end of January, I finally went home in April.
Wow. So from, refresh me, January of
2018
to April of 2018. Wow, that's a long time. So just so that everybody understands, doctor walks into your room, middle of the night, your husband just left, you got him on speakerphone, like, hey, we have a heart, Merry Christmas. And you're like, or happy birthday. Doctor leaves, you hang up the phone. What's the first thing that pops into your mind?
I think it's probably one of the only times, at least the only time in my life, where you feel every single emotion that is possible all at the same time. There's grief because while you are getting this great news that you've got a new heart, there is no denying the fact that another family is getting the worst news. And that causes just an intense amount of grief. There's joy because you're getting a second chance at life. There's worry and fear. There's happiness, all of the things that you can possibly feel. There's a little bit of I think there's even a little bit of anger attached to it because you are still in the why the heck do I have to go through this moment? Because you know that this is going to be the biggest deal that you've ever gone through. And so it is one of the only times in my life, anyway, so far, that I have felt every single emotion all at the same time. And it's just a lot. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to process.
I think that kind of fits. I pulled up this question before the one that was next because it says, "What are your beliefs around the spiritual, energetic side of receiving another person's heart?" Because it's such a beautiful gift overall.
It is a beautiful gift, and I'm trying to interpret where this question is, but I live every day with the thought that my donor's watching me. And I live every day with the intent to make him proud. I know he was a male, so I know that's about all I know about him. And I want to make him proud every day.
Yeah, we recently had 2 weeks ago, I believe, we had liver transplant or kidney transplant donor, and she's also part of Life Bulb. And she came in to talk to us about this. And there was just a similar response to a question like that, like how do you feel? We have another question on the board for you, Denise. What guidance would you give from your experience and wisdom to someone who has just been told they need a heart transplant? And question 2, what should be their first call or resource they turn to?
Well, the first resource that they should take full advantage of is their medical team. If they have been referred to a transplant hospital, that team is an amazing group of humans. They are educated, there are social workers, there are psychiatrists there. There are medical professionals there that can answer every single question that you might have. Now, for me, I needed to talk to another human that had been through this. And at the time, at my time, Life Bulb didn't exist or Transplant Life didn't exist. It does now. So that would be my next best, is look for a mentor that's been through this before. You can find that sometimes your hospital actually, CPMC, which is one of the transplant facilities in San Francisco, has a great peer-to-peer mentoring program that I actually get to be a part of. And they have a wonderful peer-to-peer mentoring program that matches you with a pre-transplant patient as a post-transplant patient, so that you can answer questions about, like, what did this feel like? Because that's something your medical team really can't answer. For me personally, because those resources didn't really exist for me at the time, I dug around social media until I found somebody who I could relate to, and ended up finding a woman who lived down in the San Diego area who had transplant, and she was running marathons. And I was like, okay, her is who I want to be. I want to be like her when I get to the other side of this. And she was gracious enough to answer my questions, and we became friends. And she's one of my heroes, because she was able to she took this strange random person who reached out to her through a DM on Facebook and said, "Hey, I am in the hospital and I just had a heart transplant. Would you just talk to me? Would you be my friend?" And she didn't think that was creepy or weird at all. And she and she became my friend and walked me through and inspired me to be that I could get through it and I could be better.
Yeah. For instance, when I was diagnosed with AIDS, I wasn't going through. I hadn't been through AA yet. I wasn't clean and sober. But when cancer came around, I'd already been clean and sober for several years, and I kind of took that approach of recovery, like the 12 steps of recovery, which was like the 12 steps of accepting cancer in my life. Like I had to like admit that it was part of my life. Like cancer was there, and the person asking my questions is Christian, my partner. He was my caregiver at the time, for lack of better, like my sponsor.
Yeah.
He had to walk me through it until we found somebody that understood what I'm going through. And for anybody out there, if you have not been, well, now right now virtually, or if you never attended a advocate-led or patient-led conference, do that. Do that. Find somebody that motivates you and inspires you. Uh, I think for me, one of the things was not to think or not to put in my head that that's them. I can't do what they're doing. Like my cancer is different than theirs, or my situation, which it is, but it's also not that different. Does that make sense? I don't know if
Yeah, no, and everybody is different, and every body is different. So, the way I react to my transplant medication is not going to be the way you react to your transplant medication necessarily. We might have similarities, but our body chemistries are all different, and the way we react to meds are different. But just the understanding, like, oh, you're on prednisone. Oh, that has a myriad of side effects. Which gift did you get given in the side effect department? Because we all know that we all have them, but we all have different ones. And someone who's been through it has a deep understanding of what that looks like, and just really can be your advocate.
And then there's all the things that I think most people don't think about, which is body image. I call the body, mind, and spirit of things. If you have a partner, if you still have young children, like there's all these things that affect the way you think. Like for instance, when I had my ostomy surgery, which was 5 years ago, like I had my partner and body images and the way I thought about myself. And there's therapy and there's group therapy and there's like all these things. What resources did you pull from to put yourself together, for lack of better, or are you still pulling from them now?
Oh, I think that process never really ends. You get better, but there's always better to get. Does that make sense? You're taking baby steps. There was therapy involved. I think the thing that helped me the most was the peer-to-peer counseling, having people who were like, yeah, that's normal. And what you're feeling is normal. And you can do this. And, that was for me the most mentally beneficial, was having somebody out there who'd been through it to tell me that it was normal. Because even like talking to a counselor who hasn't been through it, they don't. I remember having a conversation with somebody and they were just like, you have to go through that. You're doing that. And I was like, this is not what I need. You are not what I need right now. I need somebody who's like, yeah, that's fine. You're normal. That's completely normal. And so having somebody who's been there and done that is, I think, super beneficial to, which, going back to Life Bulb, is what the gift of Life Bulb and Transplant Life is to provide you with resources of people who've been there and done that and are doing it successfully.
Yeah, my first therapist post-cancer hadn't really dealt with somebody that had gone through, anal cancer. So it was very difficult for him to understand, as a gay man with anal cancer, in a relationship, like how really it affected everything. And for him, it was like, you can live a normal life. I'm like, I know I can. But it's all the extra things that my relationship with myself, with my partner, right, God, so it ended really quickly, like you, because I was like, you're not
who I need right now.
Yeah, you're not getting it. It's not like I just woke up one day, I was like, is my butt too big? Like, do these pants make me look fat? Like, it's beyond that. So
exactly.
Where are you now, physically, mentally, spiritually?
Well, I'm great now. I am fully recovered. I'm 3.5 years post-transplant now. So all of this happened 3.5 years ago. I haven't had any complications. Thank you, Jesus. Since the first year. and have had really nothing but forward progress. And I love to hike. I have done 5Ks and 10Ks. I haven't done a half marathon or a marathon yet because I really don't want to. That's not my thing. And have started this nonprofit, which I would love to talk about for a hot minute before we end this.
Was actually the next question is kind of a good segue for that.
So, oh, good. Yes. Yeah, we have started a nonprofit, which I actually started last year, but the idea for it was birthed in 2019 because I had gone into my social worker's office and overheard a conversation about a patient who was inpatient at the time and was going to be put down the transplant list in priority because he didn't have the funds to pay for his post-transplant housing. And again, because I don't really believe in coincidence, that was a moment that I was meant to overhear, in a conversation I was meant to overhear, because I couldn't shake it. And I couldn't shake the thought that something as stupid as money and as solvable as money would actually delay someone's transplant. And a delay, especially when it comes to a heart transplant, but really any solid organ transplant, a delay can be fatal. And so I just couldn't shake the idea that we could do something. And so I used somebody else's 501c3 number at the time. And in 2019, in a couple weeks' time, through a little fundraiser in my backyard, and we raised enough money for that man to pay for his post-transplant housing. And so then we sat down at the beginning of 2020 before we knew about COVID. And we as a family was like, this is what we want to do. This is what I want to do. I want to be able to change. I want to be able to change this for at least the transplant patients here in Northern California, and especially the heart transplant patients. And so we got our 501c3 designation just a little over a year ago right now. And we have been able to walk 5 patients through the transplant process and pay 100% of their post-transplant housing expenses, which is great because people don't realize that when you have a transplant, you have to relocate to within 20 or 30 minutes of your transplant facility for a minimum of 6 weeks, and usually more like 3 months, and in some cases much longer than that. And that means moving either to San Francisco in Northern California. That means either moving to San Francisco or Silicon Valley. And both of those places are ridiculously expensive to live temporarily. And you've still got to pay for your house wherever, or your apartment wherever you're currently living. Those expenses don't magically go away. You've still got to pay your gas bill and your water bill and all that for your house wherever you actually do live. So we step in and make sure that we can either partially assist if they have some insurance coverage, or fully pay for what insurance doesn't, and let them focus on recovery and not the risk of financial devastation.
That's awesome. And we're going to show the website in just a second, but we do have this one question for you. Denise, does your foundation offer resources to support caregivers? And do you know of any good resources for caregivers of transplant recipients?
By accident, we actually do, just because my husband was my caregiver through transplant, and we always are. Most of my contact with any of our patients is at first with whoever their caregiver is going to be. And so we walk through scenarios. We walk through that first month with the entire family. And provide not so much resources, but we reach out with make sure you're taking care of yourself, just advice and the ability to be able to take a break from the worry that comes with taking care of someone who is critically ill. Transplant is not a cure, it's a treatment. And so that becomes, part of the conversation as well. As far as resources, it's the peer-to-peer mentoring programs that I've talked about Actually, there are peer-to-peer mentoring programs at most hospitals, not all of them, but most of them, that pair a caregiver with caregiver too,
Gotcha.
which is a great resource for caregivers.
Well, this is the link for anybody who's interested in getting more information about Denise's foundation. And Denise, this is the part of the show where we ask our guests to share some words of wisdom. So, Denise Redeker, what words of wisdom do you have for our audience?
That's a really broad question. And I don't think anyone would call me the wisest person on the planet. But I guess if I was to share something, I would say that no matter who you are, that trauma is in some way, shape, or form is going to come your way at some point. We all will have trouble of some sort. There's a verse in the Bible that says something to the general effect of, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. And nobody's promised a bed of roses. I don't know that any of us have ever met someone who's had a bed of roses, easy life. But my advice to everyone is that to remind yourself while you're in that season that it is just a season, that trauma exists for just a season, and that the other side of it is going to be so much better. And the person that you're going to be on the other side of it is the person the world needs. The world needs people like you and like me. And we together can change things, but we aren't the people that we are today without having gone through what we've gone through. The trauma that you've gone through, the trauma that I've gone through, has created this strong advocacy person. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. This strong person who's willing to step up and advocate. The person I am now, I think about who I was pre-transplant, and the thought of doing something like this with you would have terrified me. I am by nature a very shy person.
Really?
I know, right?
Really?
Right. But having a passion to change something, which I would have never had I not gone through this. So I think my bottom line is that the stuff that you are in the middle of that maybe you think you can't get through, not only can you get through it, and the light, even if you can't see it right now, is it's bright and it's shining at the end of your tunnel, and the person that you're going to be on the other side of it is so much better, and the person that the world needs, because you can make a huge difference in the world. Whoever you are, whoever this gets to, the world needs you. The world needs you, Daniel. The world needs me. The world needs whoever is watching this. The world needs you. And you have something amazing to offer. And part of what you have that's amazing to offer is because of the dark season that you might be in right now.
Well said. Exclamation point on that. One of the things that I tell my clients in my spiritual coaching is it's called a tunnel because there's an entrance and an exit. We don't go through caves, we go through tunnels. Mm-hmm. And there's something to be learned in the darkness. But you need to get to the other side to show people what you've learned. And that's what makes us advocates. And I have seen some people that normally would not be able to handle stress and anxiety and trouble, but they go through something like this and they come out on the other side. I'm like, look at you now. Look at you. Look at who you become. But yes, a little trauma. God never said it was going to be all pretty. So nope. He didn't promise it was pretty.
He specifically said the opposite.
So I'm like, when he looks at me, he goes, Garza, Are we good? I'm like, yes. I don't like you very much right now, but we're good. Like
We're good. Yeah, we're
good.
good. And the best way to deal with it, at least in my opinion, is set a timer. If you need to set a timer, I did, and feel all your feelings. Feel them all. But then when the timer goes off, push forward.
We are similar in that. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna cry. Okay, it's done. Let's get back to work.
Let's go.
It's got to get done, and I really dig your energy. I feel like you're, for no pun intended, you're all pumped up and like ready to take on. And thank you so much. We're coming down to the last 5 minutes of the show. Is there anything we didn't mention that you want to talk about before we leave?
Yes, actually there is. We are hosting the Heartfelt Health Foundation is hosting our first fundraiser, which is a virtual 5K. So wherever you are in the whole wide world, you can participate. And you can sign up if you go to my social media links at Heartfelt Health Foundation, either on Instagram or on Facebook. There's a link to sign up that's on, and on our website too. There's a link to sign up for the 5K. You'll get a t-shirt that has been designed by a really talented local artist, and it's super cool. We love it. And every penny that you donate that we receive, except for credit card processing fees, goes straight to the benefit of a heart transplant patient. And I don't care how you do the 5Ks virtual. I am not watching you. You can golf your way to a 5K. You can dance your way to a 5K. You can bike your way to a 5K. You can jazzercise your way to a 5K. You can golf your. I don't care. I'm not watching. But join us and take pictures and tag and let's have some fun together.
And when is the 5K?
It's virtual, so you can sign up today and do it tomorrow for all I care. Again, I'm not watching. But it goes until October 10th.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for everybody watching, the link is right here. If not, it will be down in the description on whatever page you're watching on. So make sure you go check it out. Denise, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. That was super fun.
We'll have to have you back again and see how the 5K went and any updates you might have for us.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put you in the green room. Don't go anywhere, and I'll be right back for you.
Okay.
For everybody watching, this has been another episode of Put Together Conversations. I want to remind you that we're on pretty much every day of the week. You can watch a new episode of any one of our shows. On Wednesdays, we got the Christian and Daniel show. On Fridays, it's the Car Devo. And on Saturdays, 2 episodes of Put Together Conversations, which we are now sneaking special episodes during the week. So make sure that you are subscribed to either our Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or the YouTube page. And on YouTube, will you do us a favor, scroll down, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It'll let you know whenever a new episode is up. Also, Grumpy Bunny and the Colors Game, my book. If you haven't gotten it, go get it. The first edition is almost done. We're almost sold out of the first edition before we go into second edition, which we got, I think, in October. But Grumpy Bunny and the Colors Game, it's a meditation book for kids, but it's also good for adults. So go check it out. It's written by me, illustrated by Jennifer and Vivian Gatch, mother and daughter, and you can find it at any one of these 5 outlets. So make sure you go check it out. Remember, Put It Together Conversation is a show about you, where you come from, where you're now, and what your journey's been like. And the idea is to motivate and inspire other people to go after their dreams and goals. And I hope this conversation today has motivated and inspired you. We look forward to seeing you here as a guest on the show. Get in touch with us if you'd like to be a guest, if you'd like to tell us how you put it together. For now, I want to thank Denise for joining us and thank all of you for being part of the show. Thank you for your questions and your comments, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.